Good morning. Welcome to New Center Maine's Political Brew. Glad you could be with us. Our analysts this week are former state senator and mayor of Portland Ethan Strimling and former state senator and Yarmouth town councilor Phil Harriman. Gentlemen, good to see you as always.
Good to see you, Pat.
The election's over, but there's still plenty to talk about.
Yes,
so don't panic. Senator Angus King is indicating he will seek a third term. 4 years ago, he had said that was likely his last campaign. Phil, what do you think has changed for Angus King?
Well, I think it's remarkable that he was sending the message that my time is coming to an end. I think it's fair to say he's still got the passion for it. Washington runs by seniority, so maybe that has something to do with his future political clout in Washington. And the fact that he wants to serve, I think he can probably walk his way into re-election.
This must be disappointing for Republicans because he's going to be tough to beat.
No question about it, right?
Ethan?
Yeah, I think it's because he's so popular, and from everybody I talk to, he loves the job. He's doing a very good job. He's taken principled stands. He's been able to fight for Maine in very important ways. It's a good example of why term limits are never a good idea. Even Susan Collins, who said she was only going to run for 2 terms, of course, now she's there for 5, and I've never begrudged her a second that, because the people should have the ability to choose who they want as their leaders. And I think Angus is doing the right thing to say, you know what, the people want me to go back. He's the most popular elected official in Maine. He should go back.
The Maine Supreme Court this week ruled in favor of Central Maine Power on a lease for public land for a small part of the controversial CMP corridor project. Ethan, now what?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, now what is going to be the big fight around whether it becomes a consumer-owned utility or not? It does seem like this fight has been resolved at some level. It's against, unfortunately, what the people said they wanted in the state. And, you would think that elected leaders would try to get closer to what the people wanted, but here we are. Next year, we're going to have an opportunity to put a consumer-owned utility and be able to control the power ourselves. That's going to be the next big battle for sure.
But there is still the business court battle over the legality of the referendum, and that has not played out and will not until probably March or April.
That's true, and I think that's probably the bigger question. The Supreme Court's being criticized for not making the decision based on the popularity of the issue, but the constitutionality and the law, which is where they should be. It's going to be interesting to see how they rule on whether or not we have the right through petition to take property back that was granted to them according to this decision that was granted to them legally.
This past week, we had lobster in politics at the White House, and President Biden held his first state dinner with French President Emmanuel Macron, and the menu featured butter-poached Maine lobster. Politicians took note, most of them praising him for having good taste, and that makes sense. But Congressman Jared Golden made the sharpest point, saying if the Biden White House can prioritize purchasing 200 Maine lobsters for a fancy dinner, the president should also take time to meet with the Maine lobstermen his administration is currently regulating out of business. Bill, does he have a point here?
He sure does, and good for him for using this as an opportunity to bring this conversation to us here at Political Brew, but hopefully on a national level as well.
Ethan?
This goes in the category of no good deed goes unpunished, because my goodness, the guy buys 200 Maine lobsters, broadcasts it, lets everybody know how awesome Maine lobster is, and then he gets attacked for it. I understand all the politics. I get the jibes. I get trolling on Twitter for sure. Jared Golden understands Joe Biden's not very popular in his district, hasn't been for a long time, but honestly, this was a good thing that Joe Biden did, and it's unfortunate that some are turning it into something else.
But should the president weigh in, because it's an important economic issue for this region, not just this state?
It is an important economic issue, and his administration is doing what the law tells them they are supposed to be doing. It's now in the courts, and the courts will make that decision. So no, it's not his place to be weighing in to try to influence the court one way or the other on this. But I'm glad that he had Maine lobster for dinner. That's the most important part of it.
I see it a little differently, Pat. We're in this court environment because of regulators, not elected or appointed officials, regulators who have put Maine lobster men and women in this position where they're fearing for their future.
Well, but the regulators are interpreting the law, right? That's created by elected officials, and I'm not choosing sides one way or the other, but I'm saying they've done their job on that. Other administrations, same thing, and now it's in the courts, and that's where it should be. He shouldn't be trying to change law based on what hasn't happened in the court. That's all I'm saying.
Now, if you felt any tremors coming from the west of New Hampshire, from west of Maine, I should say, in New Hampshire, it may be because President Biden is recommending that South Carolina become the first state to hold a presidential primary in 2024, followed by New Hampshire and Nevada a week later. Of course, New Hampshire state law requires it to be the first in the nation every single cycle. President Biden has told elections officials that we must ensure that voters of color have a voice in choosing our nominee much earlier in the process and throughout the entire early window. And that is a goal shared by many Democrats, Ethan, across the country. But this couldn't have anything to do with the fact that Joe Biden finished 5th in New Hampshire in 2020, could it?
And isn't it interesting that nobody's talking about Iowa, right? Iowa is sort of out of the picture. They don't even know how to count votes, so everybody's like, okay, look.
At least New Hampshire knows how to do that.
At least New Hampshire knows how to do that. Look, Joe Biden is right here. We need a better system in order to make sure that more voices are included and that there's better diversity in our early states. So I was amazed that he did it, because very few presidents are willing to ever go after that, because it alienates a state, could alienate New Hampshire, could alienate Iowa. But as you say, those were not strong states for him. So it gave him an opportunity to say, you know what, South Carolina, Nevada, some of these other states that have better diversity, they should have more voice. And I hope the Democratic Party, and I hope Republicans also, listen to it.
The Republicans have already said they'll accept the New Hampshire first calendar, but the Democrats probably will do what Biden asks.
Yeah, I think the state of New Hampshire decides when they hold their primary elections, so they're just going to continue to do what they have historically done. And I don't think, which state goes in which order is really that much of a factor. How many primary elections in states further down the calendar had their comeback kid candidate reemerge and become successful?
But it's true, and until Bill Clinton, no one won the presidency without first winning New Hampshire, but that has sort of changed over the last 25, 30 years.
Yeah, but there is, I mean, how do you feel about the issue about more diversity? I mean, isn't that
Well, of
an
course,
important
but
part of it?
It doesn't have to be because they're going to go first and someone else is going to go second. They all get a chance to have a primary campaign.
But it also changes the game, because a place like New Hampshire, a rural state, is where you get to do retail campaigning. That's always been the beauty of it, and in a place where people take it seriously. So it's a big shakeup, however you look at it.
I wonder if the compromise might be that both New Hampshire and South Carolina are on the same day, or something like that, where they have an opportunity to do both. Because I do agree, the hand-to-hand campaigning is really important, but you've got to broaden the diversity of voices.
The new legislature will be sworn in this week with all new leaders except for Senate President Troy Jackson. Ethan, what do you make of the changes?
Well, look, on the Republican side, it was desperately needed, obviously. I mean, Republicans in the House have not controlled the speakership for 40 years except one term. So, and they sometimes hang on to leadership longer than they should, I would say, and both parties do that. I do think that it's nice to see the new blood. I'm glad that Troy Jackson is going back. He has a real experienced hand. I think the real question, which we'll talk about, is how that's going to work with Governor Mills. But I think this is exciting to see all the new faces in there.
Phil?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the opportunity to have all but one be new, fresh faces, fresh perspectives, different geographies, I think that's going to bode well for the legislative session and the people they serve.
And I think you have 8 women in leadership positions now, which is remarkable.
Right.
But that, as Ethan brought up, how will more moderate, if you will, Democratic Governor Janet Mills get along with a progressive Speaker of the House, Rachel Talbot Ross?
That's going to be fascinating to watch. And my understanding is that her relationship with Troy Jackson at times has a little bit of strain to it. So they're going to have to lead the House and the Senate and collaborate with the governor while they try to get their political priorities to the front of her desk. Yeah,
I mean, look, Speaker Ross, she is not somebody that you should take lightly. She is a force, and I've worked with her for 25 years, served with her on the board of the NAACP in Portland, and she knows what she believes, and she represents her constituents very well. I think that Governor Mills really has to understand that she has now won election to the Blaine House twice because of the first congressional district, right? She has lost the second congressional district twice, yet she governs more as if that's the majority. And I think a lot of people have said to her, look, Southern Maine has a voice and needs to be part of this conversation. So you need to not govern so much from the more conservative side. I think Rachel Talbot Ross will be somebody who can help her see that.
But the distinction is that Janet Mills is not going to be running for re-election, right?
So she's free to do much more if
right.
she wishes to be more progressive, or
Correct.
we'll find out if that's the case. Maine Republicans have been arguing that the election losses this past month were out of their control. Nationally, frustrated Republicans blamed leadership for not raising and spending enough money, when in fact many failed candidates couldn't raise what they needed themselves. Phil, what does this tell you, this kind of finger pointing, as if, oh, it's not us, it's the system somehow?
Well, as Tip O'Neill said, all politics are local, and it begins in those legislative races and county commissioner races, and it boils down to what types of candidates did you recruit, and how organized were they, and how did you get out the vote, and how did you get volunteers? So to say it's someone else's fault, I think you got to look in the mirror.
You always have to look in the mirror, having been on the winning side, losing side myself, and within sort of waves of politics, you always have to look in the mirror. But I do think that Republicans have a point, and they should say it more clearly, which is that Donald Trump had a real negative impact on their ability to win a lot of elections. Put forward candidates who won primaries that just were completely incompatible with the general electorate, and there's no doubt they lost the U.S. Senate because of Donald Trump's choices. And I think until the Republican Party fully rejects him, they're going to have a lot of trouble.
People of Maine certainly had their voices heard this year. Secretary of State Shenna Bellows says 75% of Mainers registered to vote by mid-October cast ballots in the November election. It's a very impressive figure, and maybe the biggest turnout of any state in the country. We don't yet know all the numbers, but what does it tell you, Ethan?
Well, it says a few things, and I want to clarify one piece. So that's 75% of registered voters, not 75% of eligible voters, which is usually how you calculate it. In the presidential race, for instance, in 2020, there were 140,000 more voters, but that was only 79% of people who could vote. So 75% is awesome. There's no doubt about it. It shows that Maine does do a lot of important things like early voting, allowing people absentee ballots, same-day voter registration, residency requirements that allow you to be new to a community. Those things are all important, but there's still a few 100,000 people out there who aren't voting or who aren't even registered to vote. And I think politicians have to figure out how do we engage them, excite them, get them involved.
Phil?
All they have to do is tune into the political brew, right?
We'll get them fired up.
Yeah.
But I think to Ethan's point, in your question earlier about the elections, 75% of people who want to vote are engaged. If you want to get elected, all you got to do is go out and meet your constituents and let them know why you should be elected.
All right, well, let us wrap up now, as we always do, with our winners and losers in politics. And Ethan, we'll start with you.
Well, we decided this week that there's really only one winner and one loser this week. So, Phil, you want to tell them who the winner is?
Yeah, the winner is Pat Callahan, our colleague here for, 12 years now we've been doing this.
Yeah, and going farther back than that, too,
Yeah.
with in the arena and all that.
Right. It's been a tremendous honor and a pleasure to be your colleague here.
Pleasure is mine. Ethan?
And the loser this week is clearly Maine people who will miss your face every day. So we really have been an honor to work with you from the first day. And I think Phil and I were very glad that we'd be able to be here on your final episode.
I'm happy that it worked out that way, too. It seems appropriate. And to that, this is indeed my final Political Brew segment, because next week I'm retiring from News Center Maine after 43 years. I want to express my gratitude to all of you who have given us some of your time each Sunday morning. Our analysts, Phil and Ethan, as well as Ray Richardson, Betsy Sweet, Ken Altshuler, and our utility infielder, Joe Bruno, have been terrific about offering thoughtful and serious analysis and some laughs along the way. I also thank our dear departed friend John Richardson, who filled the Democratic slot for so long, and old friends Barry Hobbins, Rollin Ives, Bill Nemitz, among others, who offered their insights in the old days of our In the Arena segments. And though I won't be here, Political Brew will go on. Don Carrigan will fill this slot for a while, starting next week, so you'll all be in good hands. Remember, he taught me everything I know about Maine politics, but not everything he knows. So my thanks again. News Center Maine is back after the break.